Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Caroline McGraw, and I'm with The Clearing. Today, we're going to talk about 10 truths about trauma. So this is a topic with a lot of myths and misperceptions just swirling around. So we're going to shed some light on those painful and often misunderstood places. We're also going to put some links in the comments once the video is finished, so you can keep reading and have other resources to look at once this is done. So, without further ado, the first truth about psychological trauma is that it is entirely subjective. What does that mean? That means that trauma is defined as something that is shocking and painful for you. It doesn't matter what your parents think or your siblings think or your teachers think. It matters what you think and what you feel. If you thought it hurt, if you were shocked, then it was trauma and it was real for you. Second truth, almost everyone has trauma, unfortunately. That's the world we live in. So yes, we will say that some types of trauma are uniquely painful and traumatic. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, certainly we acknowledge that. However, that doesn't mean that other traumas, mental traumas, emotional traumas, don't matter and don't also affect us on a really deep level. See if you recognize a couple of these potentially traumatic emotional events. Death of a loved one, divorce, a medical diagnosis or a chronic medical condition, estranged relationships or highly dysfunctional relationships, job loss, and isolation. Third truth, trauma and addiction are really closely linked, particularly childhood trauma and addiction. So people who score really high on something called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Questionnaire are 5 times more likely to become alcoholics and up to 46 times more likely to inject drugs in their lifetime. And the source for this is the Kaiser Permanente and CDC Adverse Childhood Experiences study. So, but why is there such a strong connection here? Here's what we've seen in our work as a dual diagnosis addiction treatment center. We see that people abuse drugs as a way to mitigate the mental and emotional suffering that comes with their unhealed trauma. Fourth truth, if you want a really reliable way to spot people who have unhealed trauma, they're either hurting others or they're hurting themselves. There's a great quote from J.M. Storm that goes like this. I'll read it for you. Before you pass judgment on one who is self-destructing, it's important to remember they usually aren't trying to destroy themselves. They're trying to destroy something inside that doesn't belong. That's pretty powerful. Fifth truth, trauma is linked to the development of myriad mental and emotional health issues. Depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, all of these, trauma is a strong risk factor. Sixth truth, and related truth, is that going through a traumatic experience actually leads to physiological changes. When you live in the fear and the anxiety for a really prolonged period, you actually alter your brain chemistry in such a way that it is more likely that you'll struggle with mental health concerns and addiction later on. It's not fair, but it's the way things shake down. Seventh truth about trauma. You can have a great childhood and still struggle. So often in our program, we have people come to us and say, I feel so ashamed to be dealing with this addiction because I didn't grow up in poverty. I grew up in physical comfort. I had my every physical need provided for. So why do I have all this deep mental and emotional pain? And so what we try and clarify for them is that while your past hurts may look very different from someone who grew up with a lot of, say, physical abuse or poverty or other kind of deprivation, that doesn't make them less meaningful or significant for you. Any one person's suffering contributes to all of our suffering. And when any one person heals that suffering, it helps all of us. We're all connected. Eighth truth about trauma. It is possible to repress painful and traumatic memories. Doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. And the reason for this is because of how the brain handles trauma. It tries to protect you by putting events outside of your conscious awareness for a little while so that you can function and get to a safe place in an extremely stressful or unsafe situation. It's actually a really benevolent feature of how your brain works and evolves, but it can be really problematic if you don't ever then go back and address those traumatic events. And the good news is also, though, that if you want to heal, you actually don't need to worry about trying to remember everything right away. All you really need to do is work with what is upsetting you right here and right now. And then what we do in our program is we help people to follow that energy back, which is not a hard process. You just sit with that feeling and you ask yourself, when have I felt this way before? And what we find is that the root hurt and the original pain is then allowed to surface if you're in a safe and loving environment. And then you work with that original pain, and everything else is just kind of ripples after that original pain. You've maybe been through a lot since that time when you were 5 or 10 or 20 or whatever it was, but all of these other experiences can be helped and healed if you work with that original root cause of the suffering. Ninth truth about trauma. Healing means following the energy back, as we said, and also offering your past self and your present self compassion. So whatever that experience was for you, maybe it was in 3rd grade science class and everyone made fun of you and you were totally humiliated. Or maybe it was when you were 5 years old and you and your brother were left with a negligent babysitter and you got locked in a closet and left alone in the dark. Whatever it was, you identify that first painful occurrence, that first time where you felt scared and frightened and alone. And then you reparent the younger version of you. You offer that younger self compassion. You say something like, oh, honey, I understand that you didn't have what you needed back then, but I will give you what you need right now. What do you need? How can I help? I'm here for you. I love you. I accept you. You'll be amazed at how powerful that is and how close of a bond you can build with yourself and how much can be repaired just by offering compassion. 10th and final truth as we wrap up. Healing from trauma means changing how you hold these traumatic events in your consciousness. So with that example we gave before, when you got made fun of in science class, maybe you held that as, I'm a failure and I can't trust myself, or I'm not funny, or I'm not interesting, or something like that. You can choose to think of it that way, or you can choose to rewrite the story in a way that sets you free. You could say something like, wow, I was really brave to try and tell a joke in front of all my classmates, even though it bombed. Or, wow, I always knew I wanted to be a performer, even then. You can choose to see the positive attributes that were present in you and even in the tough situation. If you believe that your trauma makes you a victim and makes you someone who can't be happy, then you will live in a way that proves that to be true. It's pretty wild how much power your beliefs have. But on the flip side, if you decide that you are someone who's really strong and really resilient, someone who can overcome adversity and then go after what they want, then you will live in a way that reflects that as well. So that's what I have to share with you today. I would love to hear which of these truths about trauma spoke to you or resonated with your experience or surprised you. Leave us a comment. Let us know. Again, I will add some links to other resources in the comments, and thank you for watching. Have a great day.